All right, so if you want to know anything and everything about Buffalo history, weird stuff, cool stuff, significant stuff, whatever, you got to listen to this episode with Anthony Greco. He's a director of exhibits at the Buffalo History Museum, has an amazing podcast where he gets really deep into amazing Buffalo stories. But I had a lot of people tell me I should have him on. He didn't disappoint. Really smart guy, really passionate about the history of Buffalo, really knowledgeable. I really enjoyed the episode. I didn't have to do much to kind of let him go. So I hope you enjoy it. I think you will. And as always, this episode of Angles is brought to you by Richmond Vona Personal Injury Attorneys. When the unexpected happens, expect Richmond Vona. Okay. So you want to talk about history, or what do you want to do?
We can talk about literally whatever.
Okay. Dude, thanks for being here. I'm excited to talk to you. I was telling you off camera, my wife saw you at the Buffalo Club and was raving about you. She's like, you got to get this guy on. I was like, all right.
That might be a little excessive, but I'm
telling you, she was.
All right. One fan. When I started working, so I'm the exhibit director at the Buffalo History Museum, but I also started at the Buffalo Club in 2006. I was in college and I was like, I'll be a dishwasher. I don't care. Mm-hmm. So I ended up serving there for like a decade.
Yeah.
And then Rocco Dina, the former police commissioner, whenever I would wait on him, he would be like, tell us a little bit about the history of the club, or what's the story with this? And then in 2017, he actually created this position at the club as like archivist or historian.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that for the past 9 years, and it's kind of spun into, they have a collection of and some records and things, but it's not nearly as extensive as I would hope for it to be. So we ended up, now we're like doing trivia nights and these history dinners where we're recreating menus from, we did the 1910s, 30s, 70s, and then 1990s. And I'm like, how are we going to recreate what are we just going to have like ballpark franks? I don't know what we're going to have. But anyway, so your wife was there and I'm glad she recommended me.
Yeah, it was awesome. I'd love to just, before we start, I do want to talk, there's a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about. Mm-hmm. And you, like I told you before, you can take this any way you want.
Okay.
But I want to hear about like your passion for history, especially the history of Buffalo, because you don't do what you do unless you just really love it.
Yeah. I'll be honest here. Until I was probably into my late teens, I was never knowledgeable about the history of Buffalo. I loved history in general. I was out to breakfast with my dad one day and he was like, you got to go back to school and be a history teacher, because when you tell a story, it's like if we're talking about cheese, you're going to like tell me about the origins of cheese and how it's made, and nobody wants to hear it, but you're going to like tell it in a passionate way. And when I was a little kid, I would collect football cards and I would put them like on display in a spare bedroom in my house. And I remember my mom saying like, well, you collect things and you like display them. I don't know like how that would translate into a career though. We weren't like museum people.
Yeah.
And now looking back, it's like the Steve Jobs thing where he says you can't connect the dots looking forward, only back.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, it all makes perfect sense. So I got into Buffalo history. I went back to college in 2004 to get a history degree. And luckily, the woman who was the acting director of the Buffalo History Museum was one of my professors. So I started volunteering. I got hired part-time, bumped up quickly, and I've kind of worked my way up. And in that time, like, there's so much to know about Buffalo history, and I'm knowledgeable about it. But people today who are in their 70s, 80s, 90s, like living day to day, they'll know so much more about Buffalo history than I will until I'm that age, no matter how much time I spend studying it. But like, I love the story of how we got where we are. I love like, the unique stories about, well, we had more paved roads than most cities in 1800s, whatever. We had electricity and electric streetlights before most cities. But the everyday history, I love. Like, I'll sit there and read on newspapers.com. I'll just go through old newspapers and see what people were talking about today in 1922 or something like that.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I've been doing that for almost 20 years now. So it's just cumulative knowledge. But that being said, there's still so many more people that know just vastly more information about it than I do.
Yeah, I was almost going to ask, like, where does one even start? Because that's like, what a daunting task to say, hey, I got to try to learn as much as I possibly can about this city that's actually quite old.
Yeah. I did a World War I exhibit about Buffalo's involvement in World War I, and I read a quote, and it was from George Marshall, who had to plan this big military maneuver. And he said, the best way to begin is to commence, a real kind of Yogi Berra type saying.
Yeah.
But like, that's all it is. You just got to dive into it and, take your time and read as much as you can and soak it in.
Yeah, it's funny. That reminds me of when I talk to especially like business owners about the use or the adoption of AI.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's at a different kind of stage with it. It has a different understanding of how they want to use it. But I think a lot of apprehension comes from the train's moving so fast. I don't even know like what to do. It's like you got to just start.
Yeah.
Like whatever it is, just like one foot in front of the other.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I was thinking about this and I'm like, man, like, okay, so now you answered part of the question, like you're on newspapers.com,
Mm-hmm.
but how do you approach each day? Like, is it like, hey, there's something I need to learn about or something I should learn about, or hey, the museum should, I mean, I'm just really curious how this all works at the museum, especially.
So I'll give you an example. We'll take it back to World War I for a second. In 2017, that was the 100th anniversary of U.S. involvement in World War I. Mm-hmm. The war had already been going on for over 2 years. But I knew that we were going to be doing this 100th anniversary exhibit, and I knew that we had a ton of things in the collection that could tell that story. So I dove in. I listened to every podcast I could find. I read as many newspapers. There's a great publication Erie County put out about the history of Erie County in World War I. I read probably 14 or 15 books on it. I just soaked in as much information as I possibly could. And that's how I approach everything, provided I have time to do it. Mm-hmm. Right now, I actually just talked to their manager on the phone, but we're doing an exhibit with the Goo Goo Dolls in the fall.
Oh, sweet.
And and I'm like stoked about doing it. And so I've been working with Jeff Myers, the music writer, for a number of months. And we, same thing, same approach. I started clipping every newspaper article I could find about the Goo Goo Dolls from 1986 on. The funny thing is, when you are looking for Goo Goo Dolls in newspapers in the mid-'80s, you'll find ads for the toy. They were called Goo Goo Dolls. They were like, Labubu, is that what they're called?
Yeah,
now?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
But like they're just like little potato-looking dolls, and they were like the Beanie Babies of their day.
Yeah.
And they saw an ad for, as the story goes, Johnny saw the ad for one of them in a magazine and was like, well, we're going to be called the Goo Goo Dolls. So like, you just learn their story bit by bit. I don't feel comfortable when I do an exhibit. I don't feel comfortable relying a lot on the research of others, because I need to like learn the story for myself, because I need to know the nuances of it, because I want to tell the story the way I want to tell it.
Right. That is interesting. Yeah, you are a storyteller.
Thank you.
And you have to make decisions about which stories you want to tell and how you want to tell them.
Yeah.
How does that play out? Like because this is really interesting. I haven't really thought about it like this, where, okay, so this guy over here tells a story this way. You say, okay, I'm going to read this and understand it, but now I'm going to do my own research. Do you find that you oftentimes that your rendition is different than others, or are there a lot of similarities? Or can it be vastly different?
There's certain things everybody can agree on. This happened on a certain date, but the truth, I mean, what is the truth of history? Everybody has a different perspective. But at the History Museum, what we've really tried to do over the past 5-10 years under our director, Melissa Brown, is we're really big on co-curation and partnerships with different people throughout the community. Mm-hmm. So if I'm doing an exhibit, we did an exhibit at the Longshed building at Canalside that opened last year. To do that, we interviewed maybe 30 historians to get their take. What do you think should be in this exhibit? And as you can imagine, there's people with different interests, and they're like, well, this needs to be in there, that needs to be in there. And we kind of have conversations, and we filter it through to make sure that we've got a lot of different perspectives. We understand that there's a lot of nuance to history. So that's really the approach we take, is letting the community tell the story, and we kind of help them do that.
What do you think is like the biggest falsehood, or like we'll say like wives' tale out there about Buffalo that people commonly believe that is not true?
Oh my gosh. How long is this podcast? Number one, not everyone's grandfather was standing next to President McKinley when he got shot.
Not everybody?
Everybody's like, oh yeah, my great-grandfather was right next to McKinley when he got shot. And I'm like, we know who was there. We have their names. Like, we've got the records. This wasn't like nobody covered it. Yeah. But everybody wants a connection to that. Also, in the same vein, people say that, oh, I was at the greatest comeback game. It's the same thing. Like, they say that everybody that claims they were at the greatest comeback game, if that were true, there would have been 500,000 people at that back in 93. But the thing I really take issue with is when people say, I don't know where this comes from, but there's no way it's true. One of the statistics people say about Buffalo history is that at the turn of the century, there were more millionaires per capita in Buffalo than New York City. it's just no, it's just not true. Buffalo was not a small city at the turn of the century. I want to say we had like 300,000. I could be wrong on that. But no, New York City was loaded with money.
Yeah, it sounds as it is today.
And none of us have ever been able to find where that originated, where that claim came from.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but there's a lot of things like that. Oh, the McKinley Curse is another one.
What's the McKinley Curse?
That everything in Buffalo has gone south since McKinley got shot. Oh, okay. And Josh Allen and Peyton Manning did that thing over the summer, or at last football season, where they were like, not debunking it, they were like burning things, like trying to get rid of the McKinley Curse. So it's, McKinley shot on September 6, 1901 in Buffalo during the Pan-American Exposition. And then they're like, well, after that, the economy goes south, we lose Super Bowls, no goal, it goes on and on. Everything they link to that. The reality of the situation is that Buffalo's economy and population grew until like 1945. And then after World War II, when defense contracts were done and things for World War II, that's when we start to lose people, money. You've got, the economy, like the steel industry shifts to other countries. So Bethlehem Steel ends up going under in 85, I think, is ultimately their last year.
Yep.
But at a glance, if somebody who's the armchair historian is like, well, McKinley was shot and then everything kind of started to suck.
Yeah.
It's fun to talk about.
Have you ever seen, I'm sure, I know you have, honestly. So what I'm about to say is like, I have a little bit of knowledge about Bethlehem Steel because one of the things that we've done for a long time, me and my business partners represent people who were exposed to asbestos at Bethlehem Steel, many other places around here. And then unfortunately they get sick and pass away much later in life.
Yeah.
But I've had clients who like lived in Lackawanna back in, like the 50s, the 60s when it was like, or maybe even a little bit earlier, more so the 50s when it was like rocking and like everyone's working at the steel mill. Pretty wild, like how much things can change after like, I mean, but it makes sense when you think about it. Like it was such a huge employer and people made a lot of money and were living well. And then it's like, bam, it's like gone.
And then, well, I mean, Lackawanna is named Lackawanna because the steel industry comes up here from Lackawanna, Pennsylvania, Lackawanna County, is it? Pennsylvania? Like the Scranton area. Yeah. In the turn of the century, John Milburn and John Albright and a few others lure Walter Scranton up here to start that. And then they actually name, I forgot what if it was part of West Seneca or something, but Lackawanna branches off because so many of the people that are living there work at Bethlehem Steel. But the health of the workers, like you were mentioning, like the toll that it takes. So it's powering the economy, but then at what cost? There's people walking in and you see the smoke and smog coming out of the factory every day. It's not great, but you're going there because that's your livelihood. I'm a big Springsteen fan. And there's a song he has called Factory, and his dad worked at like a rug mill. And one line in the song is that factory takes his hearing, factory gives him life. Same thing, that's what happened in Bethlehem Steel. So many people to this day, it's, they're so proud of their upbringing and their parents worked there and grandparents. But, man.
Yeah, it was really bad. We talked to clients and especially, maybe in the earlier in my career, like around like 2009, 2010, and you have, people in like their late 80s and telling you like, oh yeah, like, the sky would light up certain colors at night by the steel plant. And we just thought it was cool. We'd all go outside and look at it. I mean, even going in, this is getting off on a tangent. I'll pull us back, but like at Durez over in North Tonawanda, people would joke that, oh, it's snowing on our cars, and it was asbestos coming out of the building, and they had no filters. But yeah, we could go down a rabbit hole.
I mean, one of the podcasts I did that was my favorite, and people still if people mention the Buffalo History Museum podcast to me, a lot of the time it's the Love Canal episodes I did.
Oh yeah,
and I did a deep dive into those because I remember my father was a pilot. He had a Cessna at Niagara Falls Airport, and my brother and I would go out there with him probably once a week. And you have to pass Love Canal. So he would drive us through, and he worked at National Fuel. So he was doing like disconnecting the gas mains from the houses that they were tearing down. And this is, mid 80s when there's still a lot of houses there. And like, you can still see, oh my gosh, you could imagine people like walking around. It looks like people had just left.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you go there now and you can still see sidewalks and drains and things. And people are moving in there now. Again.
I was just going to tell you that.
They call it like Blackwater Creek or something like that.
So my dad grew up in LaSalle, like 79th Street and the Boulevard. And probably about like 9 months ago, it was a summer, so yeah, around 9 months. We went to Dee Dee's Dairy over there. All right, so we went and got ice cream, and then he's like, "Do you want to go see the Love Canal?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's go." Yeah. So we drove over there, and I was like, "Dude, people live here again?" And I was like, "Okay."
Some people never left.
Yeah, I know. Like there was like holdouts.
Yeah.
Like they're like, "Yeah, I don't care. I'm not going anywhere."
If you didn't have kids, you weren't going to have kids, and you had a dry basement, you were okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a crazy story. And there were movies made on it. There was one I mentioned in the podcast called Lois Gibb and the Love Canal, and it had Bob Gunton was the actor. He's the guy who plays the warden in the Shawshank Redemption.
Okay, yeah.
And I say this in the podcast, but his big line in Shawshank is redemption lies within. He hands Andy Dufresne the Bible and he says that. And that's the same thing with Love Canal. So I thought of that when I saw him in this movie, is that it was the people who were inside Love Canal, Lois Gibb, and the people who created that Love Canal Homeowners Association that, lobbied John LaFalce and other politicians to help them. Yeah. They were the ones who got help. It wasn't other people coming to help them. They had to find their own way out.
It's funny because I was going to ask you if your, I guess, so-called historical jurisdiction extends to Niagara Falls.
Depends on the story.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Because I mean, that could be a whole nother podcast. Niagara Falls.
It's a little bit of mission creep, but like I can't not. Everyone was telling me to do Love Canal, so I'm like, I love Love.
Yeah.
Well, I don't love Love Canal, but couldn't not do it. Like I'll do stories about Niagara Falls, and the justification we'll often say at the museum is like, well, once we were all part of one big county, and like really, what is Western New York anyway? But yeah, we're technically Erie County, but I'll meander outside though.
Yeah. So you have your podcast too, and quickly, like, one, where can people find it? But then I want to talk to you about like maybe what are some of your favorite episodes, and maybe it's Love Canal. Like, how's your experience been with that?
So it's the Buffalo History Museum podcast, and it's Spotify, Apple. It's not video; it's just audio. We started it in 2020 during COVID because we were doing a pivot to digital platforms like so many places were. And I mean, my main job is to curate the exhibits, but obviously I couldn't do that when nobody's allowed in the museum.
Right.
So I bought like a cheap Audio Technica mic, and I remember just trying to figure out like Adobe Audition and how do I do this, never thinking that 5 years later I'd still be doing it. Yeah. We have maybe 55, 60 episodes because they're so labor intensive with research, and I mean, I put like a whole like music bed to them. Oh, cool. I want them to be immersive. A lot of museum podcasts are like, well, we're going to talk about this object today, and they bring in a curator and it's kind of dry. I didn't want that. I want like more storytelling. But in terms of favorite episodes, I've got a few. One of them that took me probably the longest to research was about Houdini performing in Buffalo.
Okay, I want to hear about that.
Because there had been some people who had done research on it. Steve Sean had done some research, and he had uncovered maybe 7 or 8 performances Houdini had done in Buffalo. So same thing, I went through the newspapers and I looked under every name Houdini had performed under since I think it was 1882 when he started performing. And I read a couple biographies on him, and I found that there were, I think, 13 times he came to Buffalo.
Wow.
A number were performances, and then there were a few when he was coming later in life. He would debunk spiritualists who were like, doing seances, because that was huge at that time.
Yeah.
So he was sitting in, he would go in like a disguise and be like, oh, they're making a bell ring, the spirit that's here with us. And then he'd be like, haha, I'm Harry Houdini, and this is bullshit.
This is awesome.
And so that one was one of my favorites because it took me so long to do. And that was like original research that people really hadn't done before.
Wow.
A couple other ones of my favorite are, so the Pan-American Exposition, for those who don't know, was a World's Fair held in Buffalo in 1901. And it was like a massive Erie County fair. And they had the Midway on it, which was the fun center, the attractions center. And they had on like Great Arrow, kind of like where Brugger's Bagels is right now, was a giant stadium, a 12,000 person stadium. And they would have athletic events, football games, track and field. They would have like sham battles between Indigenous people and Buffalo Bill's like Wild West show. But right after the fair ended, one of the concessionaires, Frank Bostock, who was called like the Animal King, he was like a croc hunter on crack. He decided he wanted to electrocute an elephant.
Come on.
So Jumbo the elephant. So they had done it at Luna Park in 1903. People were involved doing that, but this is 1901. So he had, they claimed that the elephant had attacked one of his trainers, and they're like, well, no choice. We gotta electrocute him. Hands are tied. I don't know.
Those are the rules.
Those are the rules. Don't blame me. And so they tried to sell tickets to the stadium to electrocute the elephant. And then the mayor, Conrad Deal, steps in and is like, all right, you can do it, but you can't actually have people pay to watch this. And they end up bringing him to the stadium, electrocuting him, trying to anyhow. The elephant kind of like laughed it off. And he was on a platform with these like wooden planks, and he was like ripping up the wooden planks with his trunk. And so he didn't die. He kind of like shrugged it off. And then they built him, like when he'd go to the next show, I think it was in either Boston or North Carolina, the next exposition, they were like, this is Jumbo the Second, like the death-defying elephant who can't be killed by lightning. And then they started, so then that was the inspiration behind why they electrocuted Topsy was the name of the elephant that they killed in Luna Park. And it was the same people, like people who were running concessions in Buffalo at the Pan Am, then went to Luna Park and were electrocuting the elephant there. Everybody was like connected like that. And one cool thing is that there's, have you ever listened to the last podcast on the left? It's like this, it's like there's I think 3 guys who do it. They're comedians, and they just tell stories about history or true crime, but they're very funny. And there was one on Topsy, and I'm listening to it. I was actually shopping at BJ's, and I'm like walking around with my cart, and I've got my AirPod in. And they're like, oh, in 1901, there was an elephant that was electrocuted in Buffalo at the Pan Am. And the only place I could find information on it was in this small like museum podcast, the Buffalo. So I got cited on this podcast awesome. Where there's like millions of people listening.
That's amazing.
Did it translate to more listens? Maybe like 100, but like
that's cool.
It was validating.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
But yeah, that's one of my favorite episodes. There's another one about Chiquita, this 26-inch tall woman who at the Pan Am who falls in love with one of the workers there, and they elope under the cover of night, and like she's tracked down by the guy who owns her concession. It's crazy stuff that was happening.
Pan-American Expo, yeah, it was crazy. I like, admittedly, but probably like a lot of Buffalonians, like I didn't know as much about it until maybe a year or so ago. I just like went down a rabbit hole. I think it was like something, was it like 8 million people came through or something
8 million,
like that?
Yeah, they were expecting 14 million because Chicago had like 20 million in 1893. But Chicago's was like 4 times the size, much bigger city. And then Buffalo, like they had really bad weather in the spring. People from Buffalo didn't visit the fair as much as they would have hoped. So we end up with 8 million. They lose about, I want to say they lose like $2 million investment on it, so probably 40 million today.
Wow. What are the there's still some existing infrastructure from there left, right?
The only permanent building from the Pan-American Exposition that's left is our building, the Buffalo History Museum. Thank you. Right. Slow one over the plate. But like the Wisconsin building was moved. There were all these state buildings. We've got a storage facility on Forest Avenue, and in it we've got what we call the Little Building, which was like a concession stand at the fair. And so after the fair, since they lost money, they were selling everything off. There was actually a catalog that was published. Like you could buy plumbing that was part of the infrastructure of the Pan Am to build things with or to take it to another exposition. And they were selling off buildings. And they sold off the Little Building. It ended up, I want to say in West Seneca, it was like a playhouse for this family, their children. And when we were doing the Pan Am Centennial in 2001, they reached out and they're like, do you want this back? So my boss, Melissa Brown, who was new at the time, coordinated that with others to bring it back to find the original paint colors and have it conserved. So it's in its original state.
Wow.
So that's one of the other buildings.
That's cool.
And my favorite quick story about the Pan Am buildings is that the place where the last building to be torn down was the hospital, which was on Amherst and Elmwood. And that's where McKinley was operated upon after he was shot. And right now it is do you know what's there?
No.
An urgent care center.
Okay.
They just put up an urgent care center a couple of years ago.
Wow.
And the hospital at the Pan Am was essentially like a glorified first aid station. So it's like full circle.
That's wild. That's really cool.
Yeah.
When you think back about, we're talking about 1901. Yeah, maybe that's a good place. Like, you read about the Erie Canal and you read about the Industrial Revolution and kind of like the grain elevators and all that kind of stuff. Like, what was Buffalo like back at the turn of the century? What was it really like?
Depends who you are, where you're living.
Okay.
If you were living at Canalside in the 1850s, I used to say, like, if I could go back to any one day in history, I'd go back to the Pan Am. Nope. I would go back to mid-19th century Canalside because it was chaos. We had Mike Vogel, who's a former, well, he's an historian, but he's also a former Buffalo News writer. He just did a talk last night about the entertainment and vice in that district. I mean, it was considered one of the 3 most dangerous waterfronts in the entire world.
Wow.
And you had people who were, finishing up their trips on the Great Lakes, and they're getting paid, and now they're in Buffalo. And then there's people who are finishing their path along the canal, getting paid, now they're in Buffalo. They're all guys, for the most part, and they have money and nothing to do. So they're getting into trouble down there. There's bars, there's brothels. There is an 1870, I think, map we have at the museum. The original is at the Buffalo Public Library. It's called the Christian Homestead Association map. And it's Canalside, and it's got marked every like brothel, house of ill repute, bar, tavern, whatever. And there's like 80 of them within like 4 blocks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, a little different now.
Yeah. We had one of the podcasts I did was about Ned Christie. Have you ever heard the song Buffalo Gals?
Yep.
So Ned Christie is credited with writing that. He lived in Buffalo. He was married to a saloon keeper here, Harriet. Her name was Harriet Harrington. And he became famous. He was a minstrel singer. So like the shameful act of painting themselves in blackface and performing, regrettably, that's what was going on down there at the time. But he became world famous for doing that. He would travel the world. He had a theater he ultimately opened in New York City. And later on, he ends up killing himself. But the things that would happen down there, the crime, the entertainment, the nonstop, debauchery.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to get too involved with it, but I want to watch it.
Yeah, for sure. Why not, right?
So like when you go to Liberty Hound now and you're walking down that like cobblestone street, right around there was a place called that road was called Maiden Lane, and they called it that because, well, maybe for different reasons, but that was where like the women of Buffalo would walk their men to the ships where they go off on their voyages. But also, alternatively, maybe it was where they met the other women.
Wow, that's wild. Okay. So, it's funny because I was talking to Brett before we started, and I was like, what's one question you want me to ask him? And maybe you just sort of answered it. But he was like, if you were going to write a crime TV show on like one decade about regarding Buffalo, what would it be? Is it the 1850s?
Yeah. I mean, there would be plenty of plot lines you could create with that. I'm
kind of picturing like Gangs of New York style.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
There was a guy, John Gaffney, I think his name was, and we talk about him in the Canalside exhibit, where like there was a fight outside his bar or something, and a guy gets his throat. Like there was just constant crime. I'm trying to think of some of the other names. There was her last name was Nolan. I can't recall her first name, but it was her and her husband just passing through, and they're staying at a hotel at Canalside, and like somebody's pounding at their door to get in, and they're just describing what it was like, the terror of just staying in Buffalo. But then if you go north and you're like in the 1880s, a little bit later, and you're on Millionaire's Row, and it's Buffalo Club, Knox Mansion, all these beautiful houses, it's a much different experience than what would happen not even a mile south.
What were the suburbs like back then?
Well, Kenmore's Buffalo's first suburb, and that's like 1899.
Okay.
So like the reason the Pan Am was held where it was just north of Delaware Park is that was all like farmland owned by the Rumsey family. Buffalo was growing outward, like it depends when you want to go back to, but it was really concentrated around the waterfront and then kind of shifting out in different directions from there, but it didn't extend too far.
Right. So, a lot of people are curious or talk about, okay, so we're kind of known, like, and again, we were talking about earlier where it's kind of exaggerated a little bit. People don't have the right information, but like at the beginning of the 1900s, I mean, Buffalo was rocking. Like it was in a really good place. It was it like top 10 biggest city?
It peaks at number 8 in 1900, the 1900 census.
Okay.
And then it kind of peters out after that.
How like I know it's different for different people, but like for those how was it generally here between like say 1900 and 1950-ish or around there when going through the war before the steel factory started kind of going down? What was it like here?
Well, I mean, there were a lot of jobs. Not, probably not a lot of things change with history. It's, the history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. That's kind of true. There were a lot of jobs, not a lot of great paying jobs. When unions come in and things, that's maybe a little bit of a different story. But, you had a lot of people living in poor conditions. Like if you're living down at, if you're an immigrant who just came into Buffalo and you came in via the Erie Canal and you're living in tenements at Canalside, it's a pretty terrible existence. Whereas a few blocks away, you might have Elbridge Spalding at the Spalding Exchange, who would have been, a millionaire at the time. Mm-hmm. He's one of Buffalo's kind of big names. He's known as Father of the Greenback. He's the one who is in Congress during the Civil War and creates the Legal Tender Act, which creates a nationally backed currency for the U.S. But very different classes of people, So you can't. It's really hard to say, well, this is what it was like in the 1930s for everybody, because it's very, very different.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. What do you think is maybe a story about Buffalo, and it could be about a person, about an event, anything that you think needs to be told more that most people don't really understand, or just one that you like telling and you realize people are always surprised to hear it?
Yeah. I do a lot of, this isn't a story per se, but I do a lot of like, oh, did you know that guy's from Buffalo? That guy's from Buffalo. We're on Easter, we're at my mom's, and my cousin is watching my 5-year-old nephew's watching Scooby-Doo. And I was like, well, did you know that Don Messick, who voiced Scooby-Doo, is actually from Buffalo? So I'm that guy a lot of the time. A friend of mine always makes fun of me, and he's like, technically that guy was from Buffalo. Yeah, I deserve it. But certain stories I love. Okay, so growing up around airplanes, like I said, my dad was a pilot. I love the story of Glen Curtiss. A lot of people don't even know who he is. You hear maybe Curtiss Wright, you know the Wright brothers, but you don't know that Glen Curtiss, he started off making engines and then motorcycles, and he set like the land speed record on his motorcycle. And then he started making airplanes. And so it was like Cayuga Lake and the Finger Lakes. And then in 1915, he builds factories in Buffalo. There was the big building right next to Home Depot on Elmwood that was torn down probably 7-8 years ago. That was originally, I want to say that was the biggest airplane factory in the entire U.S. at that point. And that was Glen Curtiss moving to Buffalo to manufacture airplanes. I think the very first pilot's license in the U.S. was issued to him rather than Orville or Wilbur Wright. So he's a really fascinating guy. And I think his mother-in-law was the one who invented those corks that go on top of champagne. Not the corks, the metal. Oh, I know what you're talking about. Like the net, yeah. Yeah, crazy. Also, the very first winery, the very first registered winery in the country is in the Finger Lakes. Really? Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
What about, now you have me thinking about alcohol. There's a lot of houses with like speakeasies around here.
Yeah.
Unless you're like, no, that's bullshit.
No. A lot of places, one of the things that you need to take a critical look at are claims like, there was a speakeasy here, which very well there could have been. Another thing is when you get into like Underground Railroad, a lot of people think that any place that is old was like a stop on the Underground Railroad.
Right. Just
not true. And that takes away from the places that legitimately were when people claim that. So there's parts of history where, you really got to take things with a grain of salt.
What was, or how prevalent was the Underground Railroad here in Buffalo?
I'm not the expert on this, but, Buffalo was, up until the Fugitive Slave Laws signed in 1850 or 51, I can't remember the exact 50, that makes the penalty more severe if you're helping an enslaved person escape to Canada. Prior to that, because, New York, slavery is illegal in New York decades before that. So I think it probably would have been much more strictly enforced after 1850 here, when people actually had to have something to fear. And by the way, the person that signed that was Millard Fillmore, who's a Buffalo president. Mm-hmm. And that's considered, that he's pretty universally known as one of the worst presidents, or at least the least remembered president. He didn't really do much. He opened up the port of Japan to trade. His wife, Abigail, built the first White House library. But what he's really known for is this really terrible piece of legislation that it was really kind of him riding the political fence, trying to prolong his political career, trying to push the Civil War down the road a bit. But I think there would have been a lot of places in Buffalo that would have provided support for people on the Underground Railroad, but they didn't necessarily have to hide them as much as I think people thought they would have. That's really, really Rochester is more the city known for that. But again, I'm not really the expert on that.
You don't go that far?
I don't.
You dabble.
I
dabble
don't.
in Monroe
But
County.
Underground Railroad is such a complicated piece of history because there's not a lot of records of it.
Yeah.
And people who are into it, like they dedicate their lives to finding these stories and things. And I'll read as much as I can about it, but I'm in no way an expert on it.
So now I think, so we're kind of like, I didn't really know where we were going to go with this, but I think one thing I'd love to, you said something earlier. I don't know if this is what you said. Did you say because there's a saying history repeats itself. Do you think that's true?
I say it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
But it rhymes. Okay.
Because there's always similar stories. The one exhibit I did called Continuum, which we did for the bicentennial of Erie County. We called it Continuum for a reason, because the themes that we broke the exhibit down to, they apply to today. Like common threads throughout the exhibit are innovation, immigration, conflict, and things like that. And they echo still to this day. One of the examples I'll give is when I was doing that exhibit, it opened in September of 2021. So we're just coming out of like COVID, really. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I spent a lot of time researching was the Spanish flu in 1918. And all that, like, you look at the similarities between the Spanish flu and COVID, it's like you were transported out of that time. The major difference is, so they shut down the city in 1918, but they only shut it down for a couple weeks. Granted, a ton more people passed away because of the infection. But the newspapers were, all right, can the government force us to wear masks? Can they actually shut down the economy? Is that a thing? Are they allowed to do that? Can we go to football games? Like, can we go to baseball games? And so it was the same things. Can we arrest somebody for spitting if they, like the crazy things that were all around that people were talking about during COVID? Same thing, 1918, same things.
Wow. I asked because, I'm curious, like, where do you think Buffalo is right now? What do you think is going on? Like, I feel like we had like all this excitement. You have the Buffalo Billion Project, the city's being built up, and it still is to an extent, but now you see, one of the biggest developers pulling out, trying to sell everything. You see all the restaurants, not all, but a lot of restaurants closing. What do you think is going on based on like maybe your perspective? I
think it's largely, I don't think it's Buffalo doing anything incorrectly. I think it's overall the economy is changing very quickly. Yeah. We mentioned AI. So, that there's a ton of people who've lost jobs because of AI. Yeah. Like you see Amazon, it won't even get covered in the news. It'll be, Amazon cuts 30,000 jobs. Yeah, that's or UPS is 50,000. Yeah. It's going to affect a lot of people here, which in turn is going to affect every economy, especially one maybe as, I don't want to say fragile, but like we're a small city. Yeah. And then you have, a ton of bars and breweries, but that gets into, the younger generation, Gen Z, doesn't drink as much as other generations. Why? Well, there's alternatives, but also a drink is $16 now. Yeah. And like when we were young, we could go to Canada like with $10 in our pocket and drink for like 3 or 4 hours. Like it wasn't bad. Now people like Gen Z and even younger millennials are really struggling houses are almost unattainable. Yeah. So people really have to make wise decisions with their dollars. And the first thing you're going to cut out is going to restaurants and bars.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. It'll come back.
I hope so.
I hope so too. Like I love the city, and you want to, it's sad when you see like restaurants closing and stuff.
But like I on the way here, I filled up my gas tank.
Oh, dude, it's crazy.
And it takes premium, and it was like $5.20 a gallon or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, okay, that doesn't really affect your weekly behaviors too much. But then, okay, every order you get from Amazon, now there's a fuel surcharge with that. So all of that is going to affect people who are already being very affected by the economy. And hopefully Buffalo has enough going on for it that we can, get through.
I mean, Buffalo has come a long way, though.
Absolutely.
You were talking about it, and it's something that I think a lot of people are really interested in. They just don't know enough about is, we're talking about it was booming, things are going great. You don't need the steel anymore because of the wars dying down. Beth Steel eventually closes in the mid 80s. I think last shift, my partner would know this, was may have been 90, but it was it was like a skeleton crew, right? What happened? Is it just we didn't plan for this to happen and we had no other way to simulate the economy? And what was it, for those of us who are a little bit younger, what was it? It seems like there was a stark contrast between how it was here in the 50s and then obviously into the 70s, the 80s, that kind of thing.
Yeah. We had, and this reminds me of conversations I would have with my dad at the dinner table, where when I'm in my early 20s, he'd be like, just go get a job at this factory, go to National Fuel or whatever and get a job. And I'm like, okay, but they're not hiring union workers anymore. You're going to be getting paid, minimum wage. So yeah, if you look at people who were, in Buffalo in the mid 20th century, where, a family of four could survive on one earner's income, and they could have a vacation home as well. Those days are long gone. And I forgot what the rest of the question was.
No, I tried to imagine. I'm like, was this a dramatic downfall after the steel mills closed? Or was it a gradual thing? Because it's crazy, right? Well, I'll say this before because you know this, right? I have friends that come visit me, right, from New York City or whatever. They're not from here. And once in a while, I'm going to take you over and show you Grand Central Terminal. And they're looking at it, they're how is this empty? What's going on here? It's crazy. And I think it's hard for people to imagine.
So that was built in I want to say 1930 or 31 when they finished that. It was right after. So we finished building City Hall right when the Depression hit. And, Buffalo's got a lot of money at that point. And they anticipated when they built Central Terminal 3 miles outside of the city, they anticipated that the city would continue to grow. Right. So then the Depression hits, but then you've got the rise of the automobile and suburbanization, so people rely less upon trains, and so there's a lot of different factors that come into play. But what Buffalo experienced with Bethlehem Steel is not unlike what every other Rust Belt city went, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, whatever. Our economies, we were manufacturing economies, and now that went away, so we had to figure out a way to reinvent ourselves. Luckily for Buffalo, we had so many great architects and things here that now we are so well built upon or situated for cultural tourism. We've got the Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, and we've got, City Hall, Central Terminal, the Guarantee Building, so on and so forth, tons of buildings. And I think a lot of that is because we stagnated so much throughout the 20th century, where a lot of other cities may have torn them down and we didn't. And then we were able to put money into them, and now they're these amazing resources we have to bring people in. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. But there's, and then we've got the medical campus and things that are helping us to bring people here. But yeah, I mean, Buffalo was built upon its location as a transshipment center on the Erie Canal in Lake Erie. When that goes away because of, railways being the dominant form of shipping that takes over in the 20th century, well, really the late 19th century, and then the St. Lawrence Seaway that opens in the 1950s that makes Buffalo's location pretty much, pointless. Yeah. It doesn't matter anymore. So we were, since the beginning of anybody living here, indigenous people, the Haudenosaunee, whoever, it was built upon its location. That's what made Buffalo. And then technology made that location less important. Yeah. And that was what we have to find ways around.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I want to talk to you about the museum. And you mentioned something earlier about curating exhibits.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot goes into that. Can you kind of talk about, because you kind of not kind of, I mean, like we said earlier, you are a storyteller. You guys get to pick what stories you want to tell, what ones you don't don't feel comfortable telling yet. Like what goes into all that? Because I got to imagine there's a million things you want to do and you just have to figure out a way to pick.
It's tough. Yeah. And putting on an exhibit is extremely expensive. Museums will put, if you want a nice, professional, interactive, immersive exhibit, you're looking at $350 a square foot, wow, which is crazy. But that's what people come to expect now, especially because they have, iPhones and tablets where they're used to touchscreens and things. But excuse me, we have. You mentioned topics that maybe we're not ready to cover yet. We kind of lean into that now. Again, we try and tell the stories that maybe are undertold, or that to not tell them would be to take the easy way out. Mm-hmm. So when we told the Erie Canal story at Canalside, we didn't just lean into, well, it lowered shipping costs by 90%, and every decade the population of Buffalo between 1820 and 1860 doubled, if not more. Like, those stories are in there, but really the story that we wanted to include was the story of the indigenous, and how this was all originally, Seneca territory, and then through a series of treaties that's taken away. A lot of people wouldn't expect to see that story, especially in an exhibit that's celebrating the Erie Canal, but we're not afraid to take on stories that are complicated and telling multiple perspectives. And again, to do that, we had an entire Indigenous advisory panel for that exhibit to make sure we're telling the story from their point of view. And even, there's so many different Indigenous nations, we had to make sure that we had several of them represented. The African American story, the Black experience down at Canalside, we wanted to make sure we told that story. We didn't want to just celebrate the Erie Canal. Of course, the Erie Canal made Buffalo and made much of the nation. But it's much more complicated than that. So when it comes to choosing exhibits, we don't really want to stray away from difficult stories. But then there's really easy ones. Again, we're doing one with the Goo Goo Dolls. It's their 40th anniversary. No brainer. Yeah. So they're really into it, and I'm really into it. And hopefully we knock it out of the park with it. And we work a lot with other organizations too, to tell that we did an exhibit with Stitch Buffalo a couple years ago. So we give an opportunity and a venue to places and organizations that maybe don't have the opportunity to tell their own story. Mm-hmm. We did one with, we worked with Hall Walls a couple years ago, about a year ago for their 50th anniversary. Black Rock Historical Society years ago, tons of photographers and artists and things. So I've probably done 70 plus exhibits there in the 19 years I've been there.
How long does it take you to put an exhibit together, start to finish?
Depends on the size.
True.
If it's a photographer and I can be all right, we're going to do these 20 images, I'm going to hang them gallery style on the wall, I could do it in a couple weeks. The canal exhibit we worked on for years. I did the sports exhibit. We have icons up on the second floor of the museum. That took probably about a year and a half or so. In an ideal world, I've got at least a couple years to do a big exhibit. And that's, okay, what story, talking to people, what story should we tell? Figuring out what objects we have within our collection. We've got hundreds of thousands of items. What can we use at the museum to tell that story? And then it gets down to the logistics of it. Okay, we've got this Civil War drum we're going to put in. Where's it going to go? We need a mount for it. We need the label for it. So it starts with this big conceptual plan. This is the story we want to tell, this how we want to tell it, and then it gets right down to on spreadsheets you'll know exactly if I were to die, the next person could come in and know exactly where the thing's going.
That's cool. What is a story that you're dying to tell the most, you're just not ready to tell yet? Maybe it's not ready yet, or it's going to take much longer to put it together.
Oh man. I don't know. There's so much. That's a tough question.
That's fair.
Yeah,
okay.
I can't
fair
do
enough.
it. What do you want to see? What's your favorite topic in history? I'm the one asking.
Here we go.
I'm interviewing you now.
Yeah.
How much do you make per year before taxes?
I do this all for free. Pro bono. Let me think. I get really interested in I think for me, just because of what I've done and the work I've done in that era, in the 40s, the 50s, the steel industry era. And I think even from a perspective of the workplace, the industrial workplace, mm-hmm. what the conditions people were working in, how tough it was, and even though that translated to them being able to provide for their families, kind of what that culture was like. I've seen all these photos from these guys about, these are the hours we worked, these are the conditions we worked in. Then we'd go to these bars and it was these packed scenes. It's
mm-hmm.
very interesting to me. And then kind of how it went so quickly from, such an amazing time where everybody felt like they had what they needed to just this massive drop off overnight. Because mm-hmm. you talked about it today, right? companies all the time. Like Oracle the other day laid off it was like 40, 50,000 people. It was like, boom, people got an email.
Yeah, email, 6 a.m. email.
Like,
yeah,
that's crazy. But I imagine I can't even imagine people, especially with the control on information and not much information out there, maybe just have radios back then, maybe start to have TVs. I don't know. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, they're hearing whispers. I think they're going to close the mill. The war's almost over. Are the guys, what a weird position to be in, to be we want the war to end. I have brothers or family members or friends out fighting, but are they thinking oh, by the way, when the war ends, we're gone?
Yeah, the economy, wars keep the economy going.
Yeah.
What I wish I could focus on more is that everyday experience of regular people, not just focusing on in 1883 or whatever, John Albright paved the first street in Buffalo, which I believe was the street he lived on. Those are cool facts, but I want people, when they come to the museum, especially now that we've got baby boomers largely retiring and they've got grandchildren, I want them to come to the museum and see things that resonate with them. I want to have that that intergenerational connection between them. Mm-hmm. I want them to see a photo of the Canadiana, for example, the boat that used to bring people to Crystal Beach, and tell stories about them going on it when they were a little kid and sharing that memory with their grandchildren. I want them, we've got a collection that's huge, but if it's in storage or if we're not bringing out the pieces that are resonating with people, what are we here for? So every day we have conversations about this. Every meeting we have, with the directors of the museum from the different departments about how do we increase our relevancy and our impact, and how do we measure our impact? That's a big thing we talk about all the time. And so while we need to cover War of 1812, it's important national history, we also need to cover the smaller everyday history that you'd expect to see if you're bringing your family in and you want to reminisce. Yeah. Sometimes you want that grandma's attic aspect of a museum where there's just stuff and you can be I had this Fisher-Price barn when I was a kid. And it's the barn that we all had.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we do more of that, because if people come in and they don't connect to the museum or the objects we have, what are we doing?
Yeah. I'm also very interested in we're on Seneca Street right now. Mm-hmm. I think about it oftentimes, what was this area like, mm-hmm. However many years ago, especially with the indigenous people here. And
yeah.
So I think it's cool that you told that story about the canal too. People need that perspective, but oftentimes it gets left out.
Yeah. And that's something that I think we all struggle to learn more about, because it's a complicated history.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there were these treaties that were signed. Okay, well, they signed them. Yeah, but they were signed them under duress or false promises and things. Yeah. It's a very complicated story. And you really need to delve into it in order to have some sort of understanding of it. And then I understand that hey, I was, a middle-class kid born in Kenmore. It's impossible for me to truly understand what they went through.
Right.
So we do our best to consult with people who can tell these stories. The president of our board right now, Melissa Leonard, I knew her father, Al Parker. He was, they're indigenous. And when I started work at the museum, Al would come in and he would help me learn how to talk about their history. And now Melissa's really waded into that too. She's given a lot of lectures on the Buffalo Creek Reservation, and she's brought a lot of indigenous attendance to the museum, which is exactly what we want. We want to be a place where no matter if it's indigenous people, Buffalo's Black community or refugee populations that are coming in, we want all of them to be able to come to the museum and see themselves represented. And that's, idealistic and very challenging, but that's what we strive for.
It's awesome. You mentioned let me ask this. Which exhibit right now, if there's one exhibit for people to come see right now at the museum, what would you tell them? What would draw them in, you think?
So it's that Continuum exhibit. So it was, again, for the bicentennial of Erie County. And what we did was we started from it's kind of that traditional march through time. So you can learn about what was Buffalo like during the Ice Age, the last Ice Age. And we've got the rib bone of a mastodon on display. And then you've got... it goes through French and Indian War and War of 1812 and the Great Survey with the Holland Land Company, right up through COVID and the Black Lives Matters protests that were here in 2021. I say that that's the place to visit because we did that as the main anchor attraction. So if you have an hour and you're unfamiliar with Buffalo history, you go to Continuum, you can spend 45 minutes in there and you can come out with an understanding of why Buffalo matters, why Western New York matters. And hopefully you'll be able to be I had no idea that happened. I had no idea the Pan Am was here. McKinley was shot. We've got, I call them the ruby slippers of the collection, the one of ones that we have in the collection. I tried to get as many of them out as possible. So people, it's like when you go to the Smithsonian, they've got Lincoln's hat or the ruby slippers. You're wowed by what you're looking at. We've got things that you can't believe are in existence. There was a boat called the Caroline that was part of this thing called the Patriot War in 1837. And the British set this ship on fire and pushed it over Niagara Falls. The figurehead of the ship, this carving of a woman, was discovered at the bottom of the falls, and it's in our collection, and now it's on display. So from, nearly 200 years ago, this thing that was on fire is now here to tell that story.
Wow.
So there's things like that I want people to come into Continuum and be wowed by. The gun that killed McKinley. We've got that on display, along with the surgical tools and the handcuffs that they put Shoggoths in. We've got you like Bethlehem Steel. We've got the very first piece of steel that was it was a ceremonial piece of steel, like 4 inches long. That was the first thing created at Bethlehem Steel. We've got things like that.
That's really cool. Yeah. How do you do people just bring these things to you, or is it like just known, like, okay, we're tearing down the Bill Stadium, we need to give the History Museum X, Y, and Z? Like, how does this work?
Yeah. A lot of people do that. Primarily, we're donation driven. We have a meeting once a month with the committee where we go over let's say we've got 20 people who are offering donations to us. We'll evaluate them based on their relevancy to our mission, whether we have duplicates, their condition, whether or not they've got a story. You might have a wedding dress from your grandmother. Well, we've got a ton of wedding dresses. What makes this significant? What makes everything significant is the story. I always say it's not the stuff, it's the story. If you've got a photo of your grandmother in that wedding dress and like a story about how she came over from Italy or Germany, and we can tell that story dynamically. That makes that dress more important. So we evaluate all of these things when we're considering things to take in. A lot of the collection we had were these millionaires who were collecting at the turn of the century, or when the museum started in 1862. They were traveling the world and just buying things and bringing them back. We have mummies in our collection. The mummies that were at the Science Museum belonged to us, and now they're touring the country. Huh. Why the heck do we have mummies in a Buffalo History Museum?
Yeah.
Because the millionaires at the time, the Andrew Langdons and the John Albrights and things, were the philanthropists who were donating things to us. We have one of the most recent large donations we got was Greg Tranter, who was a Buffalo Bills historian and collector, amassed a ridiculous collection. It's tens of thousands of objects. He went to every home game. He would get a program that he would look through, and then another program that's like pristine. Any handouts that were given at the game, if there was a bobblehead given out, he's got it. He saved them for decades, and now he donated them to us. Largely, That's what our Icons exhibit is based off of. But he donated. We've got the helmet that Scott Norwood wore in Super Bowl 25 when he missed the kick. Ooh. We've got that. It's right now. It's in the McKinley Curse case next to the McKinley gun.
It's appropriate placement.
It's appropriate. So we still get people who donate large collections. We get people who are donating, like, I found this trunk in my basement. Is it something? I don't know. So we'll evaluate it. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But yes, primarily donation driven.
Wow. Is there any artifact or anything, but I'll call it an artifact to keep it broad, that you're like, I know this exists someplace out there. Someone's got it. Give it to me now. I want to tell this story.
All right. If I could create any job for myself, well, there's two. One would be, I want to do the podcast full time, because the podcast goes out to, like, it's been listened to by people in over 100 countries.
Yeah, it's
amazing.
And
I'm imagining it's like soldiers who are in a base in the Middle East or something, and they want a taste of home. So I wish that's the greatest opportunity for us to tell our story. So, like, if any donors want to donate my salary and I can work just on that would be great. And if I had a superpower, it would be to be able to identify and locate lost artifacts from Buffalo history. To be like, oh, the whatever, this piece of the Pan Am, where is it? Oh, it's in this person's attic. Like, the things that are in people's attics would blow your mind.
Yeah.
There's a collector that I know, a sports collector. He's got everything in his basement. You go down there, he's got like Tom Barrasso's helmet, and he's got the first puck that was ever scored by a Buffalo Sabre. And it's just, it's neatly stored, but it's all in his basement. Like, that's everywhere.
What's his address?
No, I'm not telling.
I'm just kidding.
I'm not telling.
I'm kidding.
You know who you are. But yeah, it's, I don't know that there's any one specific artifact I can think of that's like, I need to know where that is. But it drives me crazy that things are out there and we don't know where they are. Like, we don't know what's out there.
Yeah.
Now this is getting very Joe Rogan right now. This is getting very conspiracy driven.
Light it up,
like,
Brett.
where did all this stuff go? There's people. One of the reasons I had to get off of TikTok was because there were people who were saying that the Pan Am and World's Fairs were just uncovered ruins from other civilizations because there's no way we could have built that in time. And I'm like, this has to be a parody. But people legitimately believe that. But I would love to just be able to like go out and track down artifacts. That position doesn't exist in any museum in the world.
That could happen. You can make it happen.
Museums are we all do, every museum is short-staffed unless it's like the Smithsonian, but they probably are too, given their size. We're all short-staffed and everybody there is doing multiple jobs.
Yeah.
In every museum in the country.
Yeah. It's kind of like startup mentality. Like, you got to put it all together. All right. So I have a few more questions for you.
Yeah,
who is like the most nefarious, weirdest, whatever person in Buffalo history that maybe people don't necessarily know about? Because you told us about somebody who did great things, you know, bringing, I guess, like building airplanes here. But like, who's someone like weird, nefarious, like whatever?
Let me think. That's a tougher one because we don't have like the H.H. Holmes, like, you know, mass murderer that Chicago had at their World's Fair. I mean, there's plenty of criminals. There were lots of gangs here. I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
Well, in terms of like criminals or gangs, like when you're like, what comes to mind when you reference that? I mean, you're talking about like the mafia, or like, what are you talking about?
Well, during Prohibition, there was a ton, and that would probably be the time period that there were a lot of unsavory characters coming through here, just because of the proximity to Canada. And I actually read that originally when Prohibition started, we weren't getting the booze from Canada. It was coming from like New York City and Pittsburgh, and then when those routes got shut down, then it shifted to Canada. But one of the podcasts I'm working on right now is about, do you remember the Forks Hotel?
No.
It's actually the friend we have in common. He told me about this because I had.
Are you referencing Elliot? Shout out to Elliot.
Did he pay you to give him a shout out?
No, but he's going to be very excited.
Every time we'll go have a drink, our weekly drink, and he'll be like, what podcast you doing? Can I do the Foley work on it? And I'm like, well, it's about, you know, women's history. Like, what are you going to possibly do? He's like, are they walking through snow? And then he'll be like, shwoosh, shwoosh. He'll make like the sound effects for it. It's awesome. It's very funny. But he was like, you got to do one on the Forks Hotel. And I had never heard of it. And it was a place in Cheektowaga where there was this really well-known magician, Ep52, who would just do like close-up magic at the bar. And it was this landmark that people around here would go to. And my brother is an amateur magician, so he's been pushing me to do that. Cool. So that's probably the next one we're going to do. What was the question?
You answered it. That's perfect. All right. So, because I was actually going to ask, you said you got off.
I'm sorry. Wait.
Okay.
Quickly. It was because we're talking about unsavory characters. So Eddie Fector, when I was reading about his family history, his father was murdered in front of his house by a gang over like bootlegging things. And Eddie allegedly goes out and one of the bottles like falls out of his dad's truck and he like throws the bottle at this gang's car as they're driving away. I can't remember the name of the gang, but it was a well-known gang in Buffalo. And I'm like, as I'm reading it, as I'm researching one podcast, I'm like, oh, I'm going to write that down. So I now know I need to do a podcast about that gang because I don't know anything about them. That's awesome. Because no matter, every time you look in the newspaper, you're going to come up with something new that you had no idea ever happened.
Do you have still call it Twitter, a Twitter handle where you like just talk about this stuff? Do you have a Substack, like anything like that?
I have nothing. I'm on Reddit and that's it.
Are you like posting on Reddit?
Nope. Well, I will, but I'm not telling you.
Lurking.
I'm not telling you my name.
You're lurking.
I'm not telling you my name.
Yeah. I mean, because I think, you know, look, the podcast is amazing and I'm going to be like geeking out on it even more now, but people should check it out. But you would do very well with like, I'm thinking like Twitter, like an X handle, where it's like the one weird Buffalo thing a day. I guarantee people would love it.
I would love to wade more into that stuff. I think it would be a challenge. I've thought about it. I'm like, I just want to do a podcast not related to the museum. But even then I'd have to be careful what I say. Like, I don't want to misrepresent anything but I would love to focus more on like true crime and more of that kind of notorious, infamous history of Buffalo. There was one I did about There was the murder of Ed Burdick from, I think it was 1903. It's whenever I do anything remotely close to true crime, the download numbers are like through the roof. And it was on Ashland Avenue.
Oh, people are obsessed with true crime.
And
what was this one about? Yeah.
So this guy, he owned like Buffalo Envelope Company, and his wife was having an affair, and he ends up murdered. To this day, nobody knows who did it. But his wife and her lover end up, his wife's lover and his wife end up getting into a car accident. They drive into a quarry and die like right when this happens. She's away in, I want to say, New York City when it happened. So like, who killed this person? Nobody knows. Anyway, you can listen to the episode and hear the whole story. But the day after I published the episode, I get a phone call and he's like, oh, I live in Ed Burdick's old home. And I'm like, shit, I'm going to get in so much trouble now. Cause he's like, people are driving by and whatever. But he invited me over and he's like, do you want to see the room where he was killed? And I'm like, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Yeah. So I called, my girlfriend at the time helped me write the episode. And I was like, we're going to meet there. And he showed us the house. And being in the room where the murder happened, they said he was killed by like somebody hitting him with a putter. I'm like, there's no way. This room's too small. No way it happened. But like that, being able to tell stories like that, I don't know what it is about true crime, but like people eat it up. Like Crime Junkie's like the most popular podcast in the world.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know. I wish I could tell more stories like that. But as you know, doing a podcast is incredibly time consuming. Yeah. Especially when you have to write it. And then like I do my own editing and sound production and everything.
Yours is
so
way
it's
different because you're doing it all
different.
and because you're preparing so much and researching it and writing it, like it's very different.
Yeah.
All right, last question.
All right.
I've taken up enough of your time, but everybody needs to go check out your podcast. Go to the museum. Unfortunately, you don't have social media handles for people to follow. You're lurking, but if you find Anthony's social media handle, send them to me.
Not gonna find it.
All right, last question. If you had a time machine,
oh boy,
and you could go back to one day in history here in Buffalo, when would it be? Why? I'll even allow you to be cloaked in like some sort of like invincibility cloak. So you could like walk around and not get killed if something crazy is going on.
There's a lot of days I'd like to go back to. I mentioned before going back to at some point in the 1850s or so in the Canal District just to see the chaos and the debauchery that it was. I'd love to go. I think the answer that most people would have was like, I want to be outside the Temple of Music September 6, 1901 when McKinley is shot. I'm not going to give any more details about that. Like, do you stop it? We end up getting Roosevelt out of that, so it's probably a pretty good. It's a pretty good deal.
You're like, no,
most progressive president. He did some good things. Yeah, so it'd probably be one of those two dates. There'd be, I want to just like to be able to walk around at the Pan Am, like. All these photos I see when I'm in our library, they're all black and white and they have 1,000 people in them. And I think to myself, like, everybody in this photo is dead and they've been dead for a very long time. Yeah. But like, if you were to somehow immerse yourself into that photo and you see the Pan Am or anything in Buffalo in full, like, Kodachrome live color, it would be overwhelming to see the things in real life that I've read so much about. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of aspects about Buffalo history that I love. And to see them firsthand will be pretty mind-blowing. All right. And that's not a McKinley joke.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
That's where we're going to end it. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right, everybody, that's a wrap on this episode of Angles. I appreciate you listening in as always. And look, I just have one small favor to ask of you. If you got value out of this episode, please go on, whether you follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever, like, subscribe, leave us a review, share this with your friends. Doing this makes the podcast more visible, ensures we can keep running this, we can keep getting great guests to tell these great stories. So again, if you've gotten any benefit out of this, share with a friend, your family member, whoever. We really appreciate it. Thanks as always for listening. We'll see you on the next one.